Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, excellencies, everyone out there, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Musonda Mumba, and I'm the director of the UNDP IMET Rome Center for Sustainable Development. I'm very excited to be your moderator for this amazing session entitled Resilient by Nature at the EU Pavilion at COP26 in Glasgow. How exciting. We have heard over the last several months, in fact, the last many years, about nature-based solutions and other ecosystem-based solutions and why these solutions matter, how they complement and really support rural and urban communities, but also at the same time, really are important for making sure that the livelihoods and our very well-being is sustained. And these solutions also complement the very infrastructural solutions that we've seen around the world. Today in our discussion, we're going to be talking about the role of finance. And it's really exciting because we really want to understand, why does financing options matter for nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based solutions? So without further ado, I just want to say that we've got Slido. You must be scrolling on your screen and there's a tag there. Please click on it. And if you have questions, tell us where you are and give us your name if that is possible. Do not be anonymous because we want to know where you're actually sending your question from. And so without further ado, I would like to invite, we have a video message from Ms. Elena Wisna Milonovaska, who is the head of the Climate Change Adaptation at the European Commission Directorate General for Climate Action. If we can have the video play, please.
Hello to Glasgow. It is clear now, only by deep emission cuts and bold action now are we able to act on the unfolding climate crisis, keep our planet habitable, while lessening the impacts of climate change. This is why the European Union agreed to become climate neutral by 2050 under its new climate law and climate resilient under its new adaptation strategy. To avoid disproportionate burden on our children, we, the Europeans, agreed to move from minus 40% cut in 2030 to minus 55% in 2030. This will require increasingly fossil-free economy and ecologically enlightened society. In the Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, we expect other countries to enhance their nationally determined contributions and show in their long-term strategies how do they want to arrive to net zero. Our compass in Europe is called European Green Deal. It's much more than climate policies. It is also about intergenerational approach to the whole economy and no harm to nature or our planet. And this is very important in light of the new policies that put so much accent on adaptation, the mission on adaptation and the new European strategy on adaptation. In this new EU adaptation strategy, we give prominent space to nature-based solutions. They are a nifty choice when it comes to reducing or dealing with climate risks. They also come out as cost-effective options when compared to grey solutions. Just think of regeneration of wetlands or of slopes, or restoration of peatlands and marshes. Think of greening of urban spaces. And if implemented at a larger scale, they also tick other objectives of the Green Deal, like biodiversity, like increased food security, like better air for people, or new job opportunities. We also need to look at the impact of climate on our collective welfare. And this is where the European Union and its partners already contribute to the capacities of vulnerable countries to adapt to climate change, with as much as 25 billion US dollars per year, which allows at least 52% of these going into adaptation. And we plan to do so in the future to help accessing the vulnerable countries, the existing but also new financial instruments from Climate Fund, from Adaptation Fund, by working with the multilateral development banks or others. In all these endeavors, we also need to attack and develop more innovation solutions. And this is where in Europe, the mission on adaptation will be our clear proposition. Mission on adaptation is a new feature of the research program. It is meant to bring together the knowledge creators, the innovators, the academics, scientists, citizens, regions to work the best solutions possible. We will also help the regions to organize citizens' assemblies so they can be part of the decision-making process from the very outset. Our objectives are also clear. 150 regions by 2030 should be climate resilient, and 75 big demonstrators should take place here in Europe. To conclude, we want to have lasting impacts with our action. We also see some hope with the recent announcements here in Europe, but also around the globe, because only together can we accelerate the European Green Deal, and only together can we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
There we have it from the EU. Really amazing and exciting to see all those commitments coming through. I'm very excited to really introduce the next speaker, and we have 3 speakers, brilliant and amazing. And the starting speaker will be Dorothy Takova, who is the founder of Friendship. I love that name. Friendship Netherlands was set up in 2007 and has been working really on very important international social issues, and the organization, and she has substantive experience for well over 20 years following and really supporting the needs of remote and marginalized communities, mostly affected by climate change related impacts in the regions of Bangladesh, for example, and people that have been living in the Northern River Islands and Southern Coast Belt locations. Dorothy has a background in business administration and international relations. Welcome, Dorothy. Would love to hear from you in terms of what Friendship is doing. Over to you.
Thank you, Musonda, for your kind introduction. And let me do a little correction, because I am indeed the founder of Friendship in the Netherlands, but the founder of Friendship. It originated in Bangladesh in Isruna Khan, but we are one global team working on global adaptation missions. We basically implement our solution in Bangladesh, but what is most important about it is that it has global benefits. So good day to everyone, wherever you are, in whatever time zone you are. I'm very happy to be here today and get the opportunity to present our practical solutions in this forum on nature-based solutions and resilience. I have only, next slide, please. I will be talking about our PILT program today. These are mounds or elevated grounds on which we can build a small village. I am excited about this program, not only because I'm Dutch, and we are very proud in Holland about our old mount landscape in the north of Holland, but first and foremost, because these plinths have always had the objective to protect people, animals, and homes in times when the water rises. And I think this picture speaks for itself. Next slide, please. Our plinth solution has a role in both times, so in times of floodings, but also in the dry period. All the benefits, there are many. First of all, it saves lives in emergency situations, but also it minimizes loss and damage, and therefore It provides for a quicker and more efficient return to normalcy after an emergency has occurred, and it even can build back better. It enhances the resilience of the communities, which is a precondition to be able to work at all in these areas. Most importantly, it strengthens dignity and respect and therefore hope. And last but not least, it's also very, very cost effective, using resources from nature and building on existing human capital. So please keep this slide, because I'm going to give you a little quick contextual impression and some basic figures. This is the map of Bangladesh where we work. We are implementing this PLINT solution in the northern Char area, which are really among the most affected by floods and land erosion. The communities are already one of the poorest in Bangladesh, and their livelihood options get severely impacted due to the climate change consequences. Also, the areas are extremely remote, and it can be as far as a 2-hour travel by boat without any other infrastructure on the water from the mainland. After floods, the people often are not able to get back to their old lives. They're having lost their means of productions, their livelihood, like land, livestock, equipment, etc. Often, the only solution is urban migration. And Bangladesh, being one of the most densely populated countries in the world, the rate of internally displaced population has already started posing a threat for urban areas. Next slide, please. A very important aspect of our nature-based solutions are the involvement and commitment of the local community. They are the ones that are the ultimate beneficiaries of the solution, and therefore also need to be involved in the design, the monitoring, as well as carry responsibility for the execution. How do we do that? Preparedness is key. We establish disaster management committees to bring the community together, creating a forum where they can share their experiences, assess risk, identify needs, and develop practical solutions using their local knowledge and also external resources. And plan and develop a plan what to do in case of serious floodings, so that everyone is aware of what safety measures to take when disaster strikes. Once the plan is developed, we train all members of the community. So children at a young age, teachers and parents, men and women, elderly people, and people with certain disabilities, to ensure that everyone can participate. We form a communication tree from community to our friendship head office to be used during the emergency. And thirdly, we build safe places where people can stay during emergencies. One can invest in early warning systems and in preparedness, but if there's no place to go, then that is leading nowhere. The PLINT is such a safe place. Next slide, please. These plinths are designed in an oval shape with a narrow end reinforced with harder soil and facing the north. Because we are in this northern area, the water is coming from the Himalayas, which is the optimal way to soften the impact of the oncoming rush of it. The height of the plinth is above the maximum flood level, so that the plinth themselves would not get submerged. And trees can be planted to protect its borders. Additionally, a fresh water pond is added to the middle as a source of drinking water, as well as a comprehensive wash facilities, schools, sheds for livestock, and enough accommodation for 75 people on average at any given time, but with a capacity of 35 families living there permanently. Each plinth is expected to live 10 to 15 years, depending on the annual rate of the current, the land erosion, and the number of disasters. I added a picture of a plinth in the northern part of Holland, which is existing already several hundred years, and still today, sometimes is very useful. Next slide, please. How is the resilience further strengthened? Plinths are designed to function as a self-sufficient unit. And importantly, they can be accessed for crucial basic services, like our three-tier health system, where community health workers provide doorstep services, and specialized services are provided on this mobile hospital ship that you see here. Also, children can continue schooling. We have developed dismantleable schools. Having access to these basic services is really important for the resilience of the communities. But more, the long-term inhabitants of the plinths can get capacity development training on things like climate resilient agriculture, seed multiplication and preservation, solar panel installation and maintenance, sewing, vegetable fish cultivation, etc. Next slide, please. So some finance, to give you a calculation in the area we work. On average, 140,000 homes and assets are destroyed on a yearly basis, displacing 700,000 people, as well as loss of their livelihood, which is equivalent to 28 million euros. And the assets and homes is worth 350 million euros. Rehabilitation after is always very costly. A plinth construction costs only 31,000 euro, which can accommodate 75 families during a disaster season. Almost 37,500 euros worth of loss and damage can be avoided. Each plinth is expected to operate at least for 10 to 15 years. So around 400,000 euros worth of loss can be avoided with only an investment of 31,000 euros. All the calculations of assets and loss minimization fall short of when it comes to human lives, and the price can never be set on that. And this solution is not only about saving lives, but but crucially also in strengthening communities to use their human capital by preserving their multitude of skills and knowledge. To conclude, community-led adaptation, nature-based solutions are the only viable option for remote communities like those living in the Char Islands. Investing in natural assets like plinths and resilience, building as a climate adaptation strategy can be 50 times more cost-effective than recovering from climate disasters by avoiding future human, natural, and material losses, as well as generating economic benefits. Next slide is my thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dorothy. How fascinating. You've already got a question coming in from Slido. Keep bringing them in. We're looking forward to those. This is absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Brandon Newman, who is with the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery within the World Bank, and he leads the World Bank's global work on nature-based solutions. He's a senior disaster risk management specialist with a PhD in water and climate risk management. Fantastic. And he has published over 40 peer-reviewed articles on resilience and climate change. Brendan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mumba. I see my slides, they're appearing now. And thanks for everyone for joining. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My presentation builds naturally on the previous one, and then I guess goes on a higher level of abstraction. As was shown in Bangladesh and as also in many of our other countries that we work on, including here in Madagascar, we see that disaster risk is never the only issue that people face, right? So it often comes jointly with poverty, with inequality, land degradation, loss of natural capital and biodiversity, and now increasingly also the challenges of COVID-19. Next, please. So I probably am preaching to the choir here when I say that compared to monofunctional gray infrastructure, nature-based solutions, they do really have that potential, if implemented well, to strengthen resilience to climate change, but also bringing in these additional benefits for nature and for the local economy. Examples that we at the World Bank are implementing, some of which you see here on the slides, include urban parks that buffer flooding and reduce heat, while improving the urban living conditions and providing local economic opportunities, or the restoration of coral reefs and mangroves that provide coastal protection, while also supporting the important ecosystem that tourism and fisheries rely on. Next, please. Now, of course, gray infrastructure remains a key to strengthening resilience, right? So my own country would be underwater if it was only for nature-based solutions. But fortunately, we can implement these nature-based approaches often jointly with gray infrastructure. So implementing mangrove restoration or wetland together with investments in dikes and levees can, for example, allow you to build a lower flood wall at a lower price while bringing in those environmental and ecosystem benefits that we discussed. And next, please. We also see that communities can be involved in the implementation of NBS, especially on the green component. Like here in Freetown, Sierra Leone, under World Bank Finance Project, we created 500 jobs in the midst of COVID-19 in a program that the government is pushing to reforest areas prone to landslides and flooding. Next. Now, because of this multi-beneficial nature, we really see that a strong increase in interest from countries, but also a very strong support from institutions like ours and also some of the other institutions connected here behind nature-based solutions. Since 2012, we see that the World Bank has invested close to 5 billion in project components that invest in nature-based solutions. And since 2018, our portfolio has increased by 20%. NBS are now also a key part of our response to COVID-19 and our response to climate change in these strategies. Next. Now, for example, here in Beira and Mozambique, the World Bank jointly with the government of Germany invested over $80 million in drainage and green infrastructure, creating one of the biggest parks in Africa, which has a targeted climate resilience function and strong community functions as well. And this gave rise to an additional $120 million of investments that we're currently preparing together with the governments of Germany and the Netherlands in these types of interventions. Next, please. We do see that the big challenges for scaling up NBS remain, right? So even though this is all, the graphs are going up, we have big projects to show, NBS still make up a relatively small share of adaptation investments in our portfolio, but also globally. And there's still gaps in knowledge on how to analyze, design, and monitor NBS, and governments need a lot of support still in identifying the right opportunities and actually being able to implement, finance, and then maintain them after we, as financiers and supporters, leave the project. Next. If you can just click 4 times actually here, sorry about that. So this is where our new global program on nature-based solutions for climate resilience comes in that we recently launched. It's housed at the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery at the World Bank. And we really try to build this program in a way that further supports the uptake of NBS across the World Bank portfolio and where possible beyond the World Bank portfolio. It's cross-sectoral across the different sectors, specialty sectors in the bank, from disaster risk management, environment, and water, as well as our private sector colleagues. And we work across these 3 pillars. Next. Now, under the program and under the initiative of the last years, we developed quite a bit of knowledge. We try to bring in knowledge and tools and expertise globally where it exists to help inform our projects, and where needed, we develop new knowledge, which, for example, includes the international guidelines for natural and nature-based features that we developed together with the US Army Corps of Engineers that we launched last month. And today we're very happy to present and launch a new flagship report under the initiative, which is a catalog of nature-based solutions for urban resilience. Next, please. So this catalog of nature-based solutions for urban resilience lays out the main typologies of nature-based interventions for climate resilience in cities and provides illustrated designs, examples, information on cost benefits and implementation considerations. A key partner here was Felix Landscape Architects and Planners, who developed all the great illustrations that you'll see in the next slides. So the purpose here really is to assist cities, national governments, and development planners in identifying opportunities for nature-based solutions and implement them into their project. And here you see kind of the diverse range of nature-based solutions for urban resilience that are included in that in the catalog. Sorry. Next, please. And what we learned over the years is that different types of cities face very different climate challenges, and that different scales need to be looked at when implementing and designing nature-based strategies. So we identify different scales for nature-based solutions in cities in the catalog. Here you see the largest scale that we identify, which is the river scale, where, for example, upstream reforestation manages the downstream stream flow and then determines downstream risk in cities, and also, again, helps identify the right type of solutions at the next level. If you can click next. This is the city scale, where city scale measures such as green corridors, stream renaturation, and terraces are being implemented. Next. And then the lowest scale, or the highest resolution of scale, if you will, the district and neighborhood scale, in which we implement more localized interventions, such as bioretention areas, urban farming, and green roofs. Now, ideally, you design a strategy that encompasses these different types of skills, as said, where we identify solutions from the upstream to the city level and to the local level. In the catalog, and we'll share the link, excuse me, previous slide. In the catalog, and we'll share the link in the chat in a moment. You'll find that for each NBS typology that was identified, we worked out a detailed collection of information. We have detailed landscape architect design sketches, as said, done by Felix and partners, where we try to illustrate how these types of nature-based solutions can be integrated in your project. And then we go to the details of the benefits for people, the benefits of the environment, human health, carbon storage. And we have 4 examples from, where possible, developing countries for each NBS to a solution to help really visualize and see how this can be implemented and financed in practice. Next. I know this was a bit of a whirlwind presentation with a lot of information on the catalog, and I threw a few images at you. Here are the partners who worked on this product, and we'll share the link in the chat. We're always very happy to hear feedback and see if this is useful. We are, as I said, starting to use this already and engaging with the cities and governments in identifying nature-based solution typologies and implementing them. I'd be curious to hear also if this is useful for you. Next, and you can reach me here for any comments or questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Brendan, for that presentation. Absolutely fantastic, and congratulations on your report, on the launch of the report. Our next and last final speaker, not the least, of course, is Dr. Valerie Kapos from the UNEP World, I had a blank there, World Conservation Monitoring Centre in Cambridge, UK. Valerie is the head of the Climate Change and Biodiversity Programme at UNEP WCMC. She leads the centre's work on the impacts of climate change on biodiversity and the role of ecosystems in climate change adaptation and mitigation, nature-based solutions. She has a PhD in tropical forest ecology and over 2 decades of field research and other experience in Latin America and the Caribbean, has published extensively, because I know her quite well, in over 60 peer-reviewed journals. Well done. Thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Val.
Thank you, Musonda. I think I've managed to unmute. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon in Glasgow, this morning in some places, and this evening in others. I want to tell you also, like Brendan, about a new report, which is just being released, from which actually this resilient by nature framing comes. If I could have the next slide, which will show you almost the same information. This is work that was done as part of a collaboration between the UN Environment Programme and the Inter-American Development Bank, and done by ourselves and another group called Acclimatize. And essentially the question we set out to answer was building a bit from where Brendan and Dorothy were talking about who does nature-based solutions, to try to think about how it is that one would go about increasing private sector uptake. There's a lot of discussion at the moment about scaling up nature-based solutions. And what we aimed for in this project was to understand in Latin America, to what degree are private sector organizations using nature-based solutions? What are the barriers? What are the enablers? And what might a financial institution like the Inter-American Development Bank or smaller scale institutions do to scale up that use? If I could have the next slide, please. We've already heard a lot about nature-based solutions, so I won't go into any significant detail here, except possibly to point out that in the little cloud of examples we have on the right, restoration figures quite largely. The restoration of ecosystems plays an enormous role in increasing resilience, whether we're talking about resilience of local people, of cities, or indeed of infrastructure. We've also heard repeatedly that nature-based solutions are important for their ability to provide multiple benefits. And people have referred already to benefits for biodiversity and for economies. I think those benefits are even more diverse than that. And as I've said, part of what we're interested in, I think globally now, is in how we scale up the use of nature-based solutions to deliver all those benefits, and the recognition that that needs multiple actors and finance sources, including the private sector. If I could have the next slide, please. So the objectives of this work were to help scale up private sector use of nature-based solutions for climate resilient infrastructure. So there was an infrastructure focus here, as I've said, identifying barriers and enablers, and helping key actors to understand and develop the business case for nature-based solutions. And we've heard some very impressive figures about money saved. But we found, one of the things we found when we talked to a number of private sector actors was that that business case wasn't always obvious to them, and certainly not a priori. It's very easy to build that business case once you've done it and you can quantify the benefits, but it's quite difficult upfront to make that business case solid. And so what we were hoping to do from these case studies was to start to put that together. We talked a lot to a wide range of stakeholders, to policymakers, to private sector organizations, companies who were worried about the resilience of their own infrastructure, or possibly should have been, project developers who are working with financial institutions and governments to implement nature-based and grey solutions, and the financial institutions themselves. Next slide, please. We looked at a whole range of case studies, and these are the sort of private sector operated case studies we looked at. I'm not going to go through this list in detail. My main point with this slide is that we looked at examples in a range of countries. We looked at examples ranging from urban to rural to coastal, at sectors ranging from water. And the water sector really does feature very heavily in this, and I think that's representative of what we're seeing in terms of nature-based solution implementation more broadly. But we spoke to an automobile company, which was worried about the water supply for its manufacturing. And we spoke to an energy company, which was worried about several aspects of its operation, including sustained supply, but also what impact extreme events and increasing variation in rainfall were having on the life expectancy of its infrastructure, whether that was the reservoir or even right down to the hydroelectric turbines. And in that particular case, they have really good economic valuation of what the effect of restoring forest in the watershed has been on prolonging the life of their turbines and reducing their dredging bills. So looking at this broad range of case studies and talking also to stakeholders in the financial sector and in government, if I could have the next slide, please. We found a whole series of barriers, and many of these will be very well known to anybody working with nature-based solutions, that we still find that amongst governments, we have a tendency to expect that solutions ought to be grey. They ought to involve infrastructure. They ought to involve large investment in solid concrete infrastructure. And that actually, if you want to try to implement more nature-based approaches, the structures, the permitting, the regulatory environment isn't particularly conducive to doing that. And if you're a company looking to enhance the resilience of your own operations or build resilience into a project you're carrying out for a government, there's a bit of a challenge through that complexity. We found quite a lot of evidence of limited awareness of options among private sector operators. They weren't, if you like, in the zone. They weren't really thinking about nature-based solutions as the way to solve the problems that they were beginning to face. And they didn't always recognize their own climate vulnerability. A lot of focus on climate impacts for companies at the moment still is on transition risk, on how they rearrange their energy supplies, and not so much on what climate change might actually do for them or to them operationally. They also found that they had when you do something like nature-based solutions, it involves land, and the governance of land and land ownership is complex, and it involves engaging with many more stakeholders than many companies are used to doing if they're simply going to build a wall on their own land. So that's something important. And something that was consistently a problem is that companies don't have the tools and the expertise. If you're an engineering company, you're not necessarily full of foresters. And so there's something very interesting there about how we bridge between disciplines and sectors to make those skills available and get them implemented to address the challenges that need to be addressed. And we've already talked a lot about benefits and costs, but it takes a wider perspective on what we're talking about in terms of benefits. And we need to look a little bit more across sectors. And then I've already spoken about the business case, and financial institutions want to hear business cases as much as companies do. They want to see the evidence that it's going to work, and that evidence is still coming in at quite small scale and is not necessarily as systematic as we would like. And there's a very strong question remaining in nature-based solutions about the perceived risk of investing that way rather than in some other way. If I could have the next slide, please. Moving from barriers to enablers and action. So among the things that we identified, speaking with lots of stakeholders, that could be done, we tried to think about who would do what. And we thought about those policymakers and thought about actually building into policy commitments, and making connections across policy commitments to recognize quite specifically the role that nature-based solutions can play, particularly as implemented by the private sector, and to make the regulatory environment appropriate. And I think one of the really interesting things that we picked up on was this question of planning and procurement. Companies are responding to the policy environment or the regulatory environment that they work in. And if there's no expectation from that policy environment that they think about nature-based solutions, they won't necessarily do so. But if your planning and procurement regulations or approaches, policies, actually anticipate that as an option and ask operators to explore those options, there's a great deal better case or a better chance that those options will be taken up. I've already talked quite a lot about knowledge and capacity and skills. We still need an ever-growing library of case studies, but to try to make sure that those case studies are relevant to the different kinds of stakeholders that might reasonably implement nature-based solutions. There's an issue around expertise, and we think one of the solutions for that is to actually build some nature-based solutions training into engineering curricula. A lot of this private sector, particularly in the infrastructure operation, is done by engineers. Engineers will solve any technical challenge you set them, but they have to see this as something that's part of their training and their mandate. And then financial institutions have some housekeeping to do, on the one hand, to tailor their financial instruments so that they can support nature-based solutions. There's scope for support from public institutions to help to de-risk finance and support, and we see the insurance sector stepping in here. And if I could have what I think is my final slide, or it's my penultimate slide, I'm missing one. I think you jumped. Is there one before that? Oh, okay. I was going to show you the report and it seems to have disappeared, but we will be sharing a link. I'm not quite sure where that slide went, but we have recently released this Resilient by Nature report, which essentially covers this full range of experience, provides case studies and the business case analysis, and can point you to lots of the experience from this work. Thank you very much. Final slide. And I say thank you, and please contact me if you're interested.
Thank you very much, Val. Thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to delve very quickly into the questions. I see that there's some questions popping in there, but perhaps I should start with you, Brandon. In your presentation, obviously you talked about this increased uptake of nature-based solutions, particularly within the GFDRR and World Bank operations. What do you think is triggering this? Is there sort of an awakening of sorts? Or, what are the opportunities for this uptake, as it were? And I saw Freetown, the tree town with Yvonne there. Over.
Freetown to Treetown is, I think, is one of the best projects indeed. Yeah, as I mentioned, we do see that steep uptake, and I think what's really driving it, in my sense, is what I mentioned, that hybrid nature, or the potentially multiple benefits that normal resilience projects cannot often deliver. And we see it increase in projects that not just focus fully on NBS, but really integrated as part of the things that they're doing to strengthen resilience of vulnerable communities. Now, what I think that the opportunities still are that we need to leverage, there are probably two of them. So first of all, still see that we have many climate adaptation projects that come to the forefront and being in preparation or in implementation that do not yet consider NBS, and helping cities and governments and teams to have the right tools and knowledge to actually be able to integrate it, and not just having a sense of, oh, NBS is something I heard of, but having the sense of NBS is something I heard of, and I know how to integrate it into an actual project investment and know how to maintain and implement it. And that's really one of the key gaps still, I think. And with the urban catalog that I presented, and with some of the other knowledge that was presented here today, I think we're starting to fill that gap and actually having the right tools to get concretely into investment terrain. And then second, there's the financing question. So I see a lot of opportunities for leveraging new kinds of financing for NBS interventions that we may not have leveraged before. So Valerie's presentation, I think, was great on the private financing. We also tried to do more work on that and see where those business cases can indeed be made in a way that they also benefit those vulnerable communities and not just the private sector, of course. And another source I think we should explore further is on the carbon credit financing, and seeing how we can use some of the mitigation financing that now goes to larger scale reforestation projects already. How can we use it actually for targeted nature-based solution projects and use mitigation funding for adaptation investments? And I think there's still an opportunity there for us to crack some nuts and see how we can make that happen.
Great. In fact, I was going to ask you about some of the challenges we've actually just articulated. Dorothy, I'm going to come to you, but before I do, I want to go to Valerie. Val, you were talking about the numbers, and you gave us the numbers there and some of the barriers and enablers and opportunities. So why has private sector not invested that much in nature-based solutions to date?
I think largely through unfamiliarity. I mean, those numbers are there, but they're there on a very point-based. They're still very case study focused, and they're not widely divulged. And they don't move very well across sectors. So I emphasize that we talk to car manufacturers and hydroelectric companies. They don't talk to each other very much. So there is something about getting that knowledge and that business case mobilized that's really important. And then I think the other thing I would come back to, Brendan talked about tools and about positioning people to be able to implement things they've decided might be useful to implement. And that comes back to that skills base. And that we're looking not just for cross-sectoral collaboration, but also for interdisciplinarity. I'm not joking when I talk about putting nature-based solutions into engineering curricula. I mean it very seriously, because that will help companies and implementers to have, it won't be something that you need to go hire a biologist to do. You know, that's one of the things that we're looking at here. We're looking at major gulfs between skill sets. And it's not hard to bridge those, but we need to do it.
No, I totally agree. And I think there's an awakening now, even with this pandemic, that, the interdisciplinarity is so critical in how we resolve issues and deal with problems. And especially that we've all been locked down in our homes and suddenly realizing all the failings of our cities and why we need to bring different players and stakeholders. Dorothy, I loved your presentations on the plinths, and I've never seen one actually. And in this session, we're talking about financing of nature-based solutions. Can you share in your experience, your sort of experiences, obviously the work in Bangladesh and the challenges of how you get these kind of projects financed?
Thank you, Sanda, for that question. It's an important question, because I think that's the crux really for these nature-based solutions, and especially in the areas we work in, because these are the most remote and the poorest. And as we all know, I think this is also one of the big questions here at COP26. How are we going to reach them? Because they are bearing the brunt have nothing to do with the instigation of the problem, but still each day they have to live through it. And I think what is needed is a mind shift, really, because I have seen during the years I've been working there that when there's an emergency, then there's a lot of money available to recover. And it's not a sensible thing. We can better get our money before and getting it to the prevention. And somehow this is a very difficult task for the international community to achieve this. So, we would like to, as I said, the business model is cost effective because it makes sense to avoid these high recovery costs. And it's much cheaper to prepare. So, I think also we can't put everything in cost because we're talking about the loss of human lives. That in the scenario to prevention is a lot, it's a lot better. Mm-hmm. So we have piloted all these plans with private funders basically and some institutions, but it's time to scale. And so we need to create this bridge, and we will be very happy to assist in creating this bridge.
Mm-hmm. No, that's absolutely fantastic. There's a question for you actually here. Somebody wrote immediately when you just finished presenting your presentation, how do we have the ability to provide this to the rest of the people who live on the Lrock with us together? I don't know what an Lrock is actually. It came from Slido. I don't know if that can be elaborate. Do you know what an Lrock is? Or maybe...
I am not so sure. Maybe the question is, how can we scale this solution? I think, I think Brendan also mentioned this. We can look at local solutions, we can, this is a solution that works for this specific area and which will work in riverine flooding areas, wherever. It will not work on I don't know what an Lrock is myself, but a rock is, but what I try to say is that this is a low cost solution for this specific area. And we need to look at specific communities, specific needs. We really need to look at the needs in the specific areas before we come with implementing big solutions that supposedly are going to work worldwide. So that would be my answer to this question.
No, thank you so very much. Val, I want to come back to you. You spoke about those enablers. And so where do you see the role and what instruments should companies and financial institutions have or use to address the uncertainties and time lags associated with nature-based solutions? And we know we've only got like 9 years to meet the SDGs. And so we've got quite a time lag there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges. And so I think I would flag 2 or 3 things. One would be actually the use of hybrid solutions, and Brendan raised that. I mean, we know that nature-based solutions sometimes take a little while to kick in terms of their impacts, and they can be paired with more traditional built solutions in the first instance to make progress, and also to give people less of a sense of risk, to be honest. If it's got a familiar lump of concrete in it, sometimes it's a bit more accessible, and you can see the nature-based solution as increasing the effectiveness of the lump of concrete. And or the lump of concrete solving the problem in the short term. So I think hybrid solutions is one thing. Innovative financial, pairing financial resources so that you're dealing with both short and long-term funding that's dealing with immediate risk and long-term benefit. And then the other thing I would say is really important, and I don't quite know how to make it happen, is the valuation of the benefits from nature-based solutions in the round, and essentially parity in the way you look at the impacts of nature-based solution, impacts and benefits of nature-based solutions with the impacts and benefits of built solutions. If we're talking about the impacts of a nature-based solution on fisheries, positive benefits on fisheries, if we go back to the usual mangrove example, we ought equally to be thinking about what the impact of the seawall is on fisheries. And so that we're comparing like with like when we evaluate our potential solutions. So it's getting the solutions on the table and then evaluating them in an appropriate way and recognizing that there's short-term uncertainty and a bit of a time lag and using innovative financial instruments to help deal with that.
No, you're right. Actually, the valuation element is a critical one, because ultimately we need to also know, the implications on people and what that means on our overall sort of well-being within society and our natural world. And so I come to you, Dorothy, in terms of really understanding. You did mention in your presentation the importance of community. So can you tell us a little bit more about, examples, or even how you have engaged with these communities, with nature-based solutions, and making sure that you strengthen the resilience of these communities through your work in Friendship?
Yeah, I think that we need to realize that this thing, like Boris Johnson put it in his opening address, is a human challenge first and foremost, because we cannot come up with solutions without first listening to the communities that inhabit these vulnerable areas. We need to start listening. Solutions only work when they are supported by the grassroots frontline organizations that represent and mobilize the most affected and vulnerable groups, to give them a voice, basically. How do we strengthen and capacitate them to deal with everything that is going to happen? People need to be healthy. So they need access to healthcare. They need to have education in order to understand what is happening. They need to be empowered as a citizen. And unfortunately, there's no shortcut to achieve this all. So you have to have a long-term commitment and get away with all the project approaches and really invest in people and communities.
I couldn't agree more, and we have to really make sure that we're going to scale. Brandon, this is a question to you, and I have a general question there that's coming up actually from David Benjamin. I've just seen it, David. But before I go to your question, I want to go to Brandon. The presentation today showed that very different angles to nature-based solutions, and that report is brilliant because you show those examples from different, context specific. What is the role of partnerships in nature-based solutions in your view, particularly from the GFDRR and the World Bank?
Yes, thanks. I think, looking at these three presentations, I think it's very clear where the partnerships come in. These NBS they require us to work at different scales, from the community level to looking at people who know anything about finance, then work at the government level at policy. And I think we need to put together our joint knowledge and skills and comparative advantage, right? And the World Bank has their comparative advantage in some areas, and then teams like Dorothy's teamwork on the community level bring in their benefits. And I think we need to put those together to design and implement those types of the NBS. Now, in our global program at NBS, we try to bring in those partnerships to solve those questions. So I guess we have different types of partnerships. We have technical partnerships where we try to work with people like UNEP, like US Army Corps of Engineers and others to develop the right guidance, tools, and knowledge, and work with landscape architects like in the publication we showed. We try to build financial partnerships, for example, with co-financing partners on the project examples I showed, to bring in financing of the World Bank together with other countries to one project to kind of be able to scale, but also try to work at private financing. And then and finally, we have implementation partners, basically, that once we have a project that we want to design, we need to bring in the right people who actually can get work done on the ground to help implement these projects. So I think the partnerships are written all across NBS. Great.
This is a question for you. You're not off the hook yet, Brandon, and I think it also applies to you, Val. There's a question from Zipporah Otieno, who's with FAO in Ghana, and she's wondering, she says, thank you for a great presentation, and I'm wondering, there is a growing concern that research on NBS has not kept pace with financial investments in NBS. The IPCC AR5 report flagged a paucity of studies on NBS targeting the global south. Also, the effectiveness of nature-based solutions in different ecosystem contexts, especially smallholder agriculture ecosystems, is still not quite well understood. Not understanding the interactions can lead the climate change adaptation solutions to reinforce vulnerabilities, aggravate climate change impacts, and result in maladaptation. How is the World Bank addressing this knowledge gap?
Yeah, I fully agree with that comment. So thanks for raising that. I think what we still see often is that when we have a project and we have a certain funding available to protect the community, you can hire any engineering firm in the world to do a very detailed study with all the parameters of how a gray infrastructure will protect that community. And often still nature-based solutions come as a bit of an afterthought. Either we just make it green, we plant some trees, or we can do some sort of study, but not really to the same level of depth as that gray infrastructure study. So what we are trying to contribute to is working with the engineering community to really strengthen our understanding of being able to model what these nature-based solutions can honestly contribute and what they can honestly not contribute, and also what this looks like after project closure. Because I see the maintenance and sustainability of these investments are a major concern, and we should all be quite careful saying that every solution should be a nature-based solution if we cannot guarantee that after 5 years they are effective in the first place and that they will remain effective 10 years later. So I think having the capacity and building that capacity, having more good case studies and more engineers, as was said before, be engaged in this to be able to compute it as good as we can compute gray infrastructure, and be very honest in also the advice that some solutions should be gray, right? And some solutions should be fully nature-based and some should be somewhere in the middle. And there's no pain in saying, we've looked at it in the feasibility study, but we decided to go for gray infrastructure just to protect the people in this area. So I think we should be very clear and fill some knowledge gaps.
Right. Now, there was a fantastic case study on Lamy City that we worked on many years ago that showed exactly that argument. There's a question here from David Benjamin. We can ask Munich Re and Swiss Re to back up financing ability, facility drawing rights to reinsure nature-based solutions so that the client's willing to take a chance on NBS as additionality. I think it's a comment more than it's a question, but any thoughts? So I start with you, Valerie, and then I come to you, Dorothy, and then Brandon, because we've only got 3 minutes left. Over.
All right, well, this is where I get honest and say, remember, I'm an ecologist, but I do think that there's an increasing amount of work going on with the insurance sector and that reinsurance idea, both reinsurance for particular risks that companies run by taking approaches, but also recognizing the role of nature in reducing climate risk and what effect that has on the insurance profile for particular operations. And so I would basically reinforce that comment and say, yes, it is something we should be looking at much more. And the really good news is the industry is starting to do that.
Great. Dorothy? You're muted.
Sorry, I'm also very happy with the comment and love to reach out because like I said in my, before, we need to have this shift of mindset. We need to look at differently at disasters and emergency. This is where we are working. And if insurance companies can help us to make this case and to build this business case, very welcome. And please reach out.
Thank you. Brandon, your thoughts on this comment from David Benjamin?
I agree. There's a lot of potential. We see some good examples. There's a Mesoamerican Reef insurance in Mexico, where actually the insurance pays out if a hurricane damages a reef, because the reef provides protection for coastal communities and coastal hotels. And I think we can, I think I have 30 seconds probably, but I think there are many more places where we can try these schemes. There's a limit, I think, to insurance, where we always need to have high valued assets that can actually be insured for these practices to be able to be implemented. But I think there's a lot of potential, and any ideas of further rolling this out would be very welcome.
Thank you so very much. I mean, this has been absolutely fantastic. We started in Bangladesh and you explained to us and really showed us cascading to all these amazing different regions. I love the slide with you, Val, in terms of the Latin America experience there, different landscapes, mountains came to you, Brandon, with all the sort of cocktail of examples, what you can do for your city and the differences and mechanisms and ways of sourcing financing, including going to Munich Re or Swiss Re for insurance on NBS project. Really amazing and absolutely fantastic presentations. Thank you so much for your input. And really, ladies and gentlemen, young boys and girls out there, look out for those reports. They're important, and really check out the links on the studies. Amazing work happening. I want to thank all you three speakers. You've been amazing. Brilliant insight into how we need to live differently as we go forward in this decade of action, and even going beyond 2030, because the planet needs it. Thank you so very much. And I really just want to wish you all a fantastic day, and be safe wherever you are. If you're at COP, please, let's make a difference. This is the time for action. Looking forward and really, really excited about what's happening now, and all the very best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. We are